A good life is a life built around fulfilling work, play, relationships, and lifelong learning. Welcome to Good Life Conversations, where we explore the stories and strategies of inspiring everyday people who are striving to create a life of purpose, meaning, and connection. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Good Life Conversations. My name is Jay. I am the host of the conversation, and I'm the founder of Discover Year. Today, I'm joined by Afton David, one of our mentors at Discover Year. And Afton and I met, it would have been around 2013, 2014. And Afton was a law student at the University of Ottawa, where I was working in the co-op office. And I got a message from Afton one day letting me know that she was having difficulty academically and in the co-op program. And she was not eligible to be part of the co-op program because her grades had slipped. She wrote me a very professional, very kind email looking for a way to regain status as a co-op student. And what I really loved about this interaction and why I invited Afton to later be part of Discover Year as a mentor is because she demonstrated something that we're always trying to help our students learn about and implement, which we call polite persistence. So it was a case where she didn't meet the criteria that were set forth in a pretty rigid and formal process. And yet she had the resourcefulness, the kindness, the discipline, the hard work, and the thoughtfulness to find a way around. And thankfully for, I think, everybody, she was able to regain status as a co-op student, and she went on to graduate with both law degrees, and she is now the counsel and manager, legal counsel and manager at Thales Defence Canada. Welcome, Afton.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for having me. I find it very funny that our relationship started when I anticipated a failure. I just find that very funny. It's like,
Yes.
Hey, this is going to happen. So this is my plan. What are your thoughts? Any help is welcome and appreciated.
Yeah. And what was at least partially a failure was turned into a great success. So, and of course, as you know, the idea and the discussion of failures and sharing those is a big part of what we do here. So, I'd love to jump right into it if it's okay with you with our rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
And the first one is, if you can tell us a little bit about a day in the life of Afton. Tell us a little bit about, what time you get up. Do you have any morning routines? What's the bit of the nature of the work you do? How many hours do you work? Do you have any activities interspersed in the day? Any evening routines? What time you go to bed? All that stuff, just to help us kind of get a good sense of what your day-to-day looks like.
Yeah. Well, I have a 1-year-old son named Liam. So every morning consists of me waking up with him and kind of hanging out with him, feeding him and doing that whole thing, making myself breakfast at some point in between, making some coffee. And it's just kind of a really quiet, chill routine that I've come to really love and enjoy. We live out in the country as well, so you can just hear nothing and hear the birds and just the cicadas in the background. So there's something to be said about that just kind of beautiful silence and just the ability to enjoy each other's company. My husband's in the Canadian Armed Forces, so he is away for the foreseeable future. So it's just kind of me and my son and chilling. And then he goes off to his childcare. And then I basically get ready for work. I work from home, which is really great because I live about an hour and a half from my office. And day for me looks like, so I'll maybe rewind and go back to the evening before. I'll just take a look at what my schedule looks like for the next day so I can prepare myself mentally for it. Just make sure nothing is falling through the cracks. My job is very detailed oriented, and for meetings, I typically need to be prepared. So I just take 5 minutes before, in the evening, just to take a look at the schedule to make sure I didn't miss anything for the next day. And I like to do that on Sundays for the start of the week as well. Yeah, so that's the rewind piece. So then I'm already aware of what is expected that day, but I also build in flexibility to my schedule. I like to take a half hour to an hour for lunch just to go take my dog for a walk and be outside, do some sort of physical activity. That's very important to me. Yeah, and then when I'm done my work day, I go get my son and we kind of do the whole dinner thing and enjoy each other's company. We'll probably go for a walk or play outside or play in the kiddie pool out here, and then bath and bedtime. And then it's about 2 to 3 hours of uninterrupted kind of time for whatever the heck I want to do, which is nice.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Welcome.
And
2
so
minutes,
you're
saying.
What's that?
2 minutes. I took 2 minutes.
And the 2 to 3 hours, I'd love to hear a little bit more of that, because the next question is about hobbies and pastimes, and I don't know if there's any overlap. So can you tell us what's usually involved in the 2 to 3 hours in the evening? Is that work or hobbies or downtime? What are you usually doing?
I try to stay away from work, but if it is, I mean, the nature of my job, I'm legal counsel, so I'm a lawyer for a company. The company is called Thales Canada Defence and Security. So the idea is that I practice law for my employer. The role is in-house counsel, so it's a bit different from private practice. That being said, I still owe my client, who also happens to be my employer, a fiduciary obligation. So if there's any kind of really important things that are happening or anything that's high risk, I do need to be available at all times. We don't really punch a clock, but it is relative, like it is very good for work-life balance. So in the evenings, I do try to not work unless there's something very urgent on the docket. And then obviously I have to deal with that. So yeah, I like to go for walks. We have about 5 kilometers of walkable trails on our property, which we love, and hang out with my dog. And reading is a big thing that I like to do. Fiction, I'm a big fiction reader. I'm not huge into the self-help books. They have to be really captivating for me to kind of get into. But I also am doing my master's in public administration from the Royal Military College. So that takes up a little bit of time as well. I'm doing it part-time. So that's, I chip away at that 10 to 15 minutes in the evenings. And then there are some evenings where I have to devote more, like an hour to 2 hours when there's assignments due. But that's that. And then physical activity. I love to box. Boxing is a lot of fun for me. I also referee rugby on occasion. I like to volunteer. I just recently helped plan and execute a fundraiser for the Women's Age Grade Rugby Fund, which is under the Canadian Rugby Foundation. And they raise funds for the national programs, the under 18, under 20, and under 23 women's national programs for Canada. So we're talking about the pathway basically to the senior women's Canadian national rugby team. So that's really fun for me, and it gives me a chance to use some of my skills outside of work in a more philanthropy kind of avenue.
So you have a lot going on.
Yeah, that's the typical MO since we met, I think.
Yeah, and I think I connect to that a lot. I'm someone who tends to have perhaps not as much, but a lot going on as well. And a question that we talk. The idea of burnout is pretty prevalent in today's world, and it's something that a lot of our students have heard about, and it's something that I am often seeking to help people in general and younger people understand a little bit more. I think there's a lot of misnomers about burnout and how you get there and what it means. So for someone like yourself who's so busy, have you ever felt burnt out, or how have you come to kind of have this many different things going on in your life, and how do you have a balance that feels good to you?
Well, number one, I have ADHD. So this is like the play for me. And this keeps my mind as occupied as it inherently needs to be. At least that's how it manifests in me. But I would have to say a lot of therapy for many years, and learning how to cope with pressure and how to cope with, different, how to avoid things like burnout. And if I'm not mistaken, burnout has to do also with depression, and they're kind of interlinked, and there's an interplay there. So, at least what I've learned in those many years of being assisted by professionals is that, you look for ways to find joy. And this goes with things like postpartum as well, having a baby. There's lots of changes and lots of adjustments there. But it's just finding and developing those coping mechanisms and those tools. If ever you feel that, overwhelm, which typically leads to burnout, if you just let that fester and go, that's been very helpful for me. And just, I've learned with age that, work will always be there. All of those things that are kind of, less important than, at least to me, they're less important than my family. And my son and my husband, and those to me are like the priorities. So that's another piece, is prioritizing and executing. Sorry to get all Jocko Willink on you, but that's been very helpful as well. Just if there's a lot on your plate, prioritize, execute, and just develop a plan, develop those coping mechanisms for things like overwhelm, and ultimately, how do you eat a mountain one bite at a time? Honestly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate the vulnerability around sharing your experience in therapy to some degree. And of course, many young people out there, it's becoming more and more common, which is wonderful. So it's great for young people to hear role models of people who have achieved so many things and been helped by that. And something that I'm realizing we didn't even mention yet is your active role, at least until recently, in the Canadian military yourself. And the reason I think of that is because I myself also have ADHD, and many of our students do. So something that I've read quite a bit about is how useful the military regimen or discipline structure is for people with ADHD. So I don't know, I don't want to go too far down the ADHD rabbit hole, but can you tell us a little bit about your experience in the military and how that helped you?
Yeah, well, I am still a reservist. I'm currently on maternity leave there until November, but it's absolutely so. Mental resiliency is part of the kind of basic military qualification course, but it's also kind of taught, I would say, as on-the-job training throughout kind of your career as a Canadian Armed Forces member and throughout your your time in service. Learning how to work as a team. And I mean, typically you're given, at least in my role, so I'm an infantry non-commissioned member, and we're typically known as kind of the work horses and like the busy bees and stuff. And we're typically given, a crappy, really hard task that we have to achieve as a team. And you just figure it out and you hum and haw and you go through your kind of growing pains as a team on a course or in a training environment, and you just get her done. And sometimes it hurts physically and emotionally and mentally, and sometimes it doesn't. It depends. So you just kind of learn to cope. Again, you learn to cope with those situations, and it's part of that on-the-job training. But it is great for ADHD because there's always something to be done. And the idea with the military and what has kind of transcended into my civilian career is, the idea that you should always try to be, the first to volunteer. If there's a task, even no matter how crappy it is, be the first to volunteer and be eager, show that initiative, come up with ideas. Don't just be a robot, be a thinking soldier, be someone who understands the why, wants to know what someone 2 stages higher than them, what their intent is, what their end state is of the mission. So all of these skills, in addition, that kind of play into my natural brain, those all have really been very helpful in my career in a civilian life. That's why I advocate very strongly for employers to hire reservists and veterans.
Amazing. Yeah, I love it. And we talk a lot about throughout the program and with a lot of our mentors, the diversity of experiences that they seek out. And I think that's great for young people to hear that you have to learn your own balance, but you can do a lot of different things, because that's not often the message that I think lands. Young people often think you got to pick something and do it. You got to get 6 degrees in that thing. Now we're hearing from someone who has, I believe, working on, this would be your 4th different degree, if I understand, your master's.
Correct.
In 3-4 different fields. So yeah, it's all really interesting. And I building on this idea of resiliency and how fundamental that is in the military training, the next question that I'd love to hear from you about is an important or recent failure. If you could tell us about a recent or important failure you've had and what you learned from it.
Yeah. Well, in April, so I had my son in about a year and a day ago. And 3 months later, I started training for a boxing match that was held in April of 2023. So I had been training for about 6 months, and it started at 3 months postpartum. So that was very humbling because, of course, you are a different human after you do that, and your body goes through a lot of trauma. I know, because you have a section of children. But yeah, it was very humbling on that front. And then, of course, the fight was in April, and I fought a 18-year-old who is incredibly talented. And I lost. And that's my 2nd fight ever. And I lost both of them. So, and it's funny because I lost the fight, but I have never been so proud of myself, because so yes, you can consider that a failure. And technically it is a failure, but to me, it was a huge win because I compete against myself. Even in boxing, and I wrestled in high school, you're one person against another person. I still compete against myself and against my last self. So I like to adopt the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team. They have a kind of motto, it's better every day. So that's really important to me. And that's something that really resonates with me. So competing with myself, my performance in April of 2023 was light years ahead of my performance at my last fight, which was in October 2019 for Fight for the Cure. So that was for me a huge win. I'm very proud of myself. And frankly, I didn't really need to get over that failure because I didn't really consider it a failure, although technically it is.
Interesting. Yeah, that I like that nuance of what's perhaps perceived as a formal or a public failure, but is internally processed as a success or a victory. That's
Yeah,
really
and like
interesting.
the first fight was in front of 1,300 people, and this fight was in front of, I think, about 300-400 people with the online viewers. So there was a lot of people watching this failure, but it just didn't, because I was able to prepare mentally ahead of time, I was able to cope with it after the fact in a really, what I find to be a very healthy way and productive way as well.
Yeah. Well, the idea of there's a lot of research in psychology that you may or may not have heard or read about, the benefits of focusing on doing better than you used to do versus beating someone else. What that does is allow people to have much more mental capacity to focus on growth rather than burn energy worrying about what someone else is doing. So,
and that would lead to burnout, right?
it could, yeah, for sure.
And then like, and I've also heard things. So on that piece, stress and how you react to stress and how you perceive stress. So if you think about how your body stresses out or what your body does when you're stressed out, your heart beats faster, you start to kind of perspire, etc. If you think about it, that response is your body physically getting ready for battle, for something. So if you embrace that as like, oh, this is a good thing, this is okay, I'm getting ready. So before the fight, and this is all stuff I've learned through mental performance coaching. I have a very good friend who does that. So it's just embracing it and understanding what your body's natural stress response is, that fight or flight piece, instead of just stressing out about being stressed and perceiving it in a bad way. Because there have been TED Talks and studies about how if you perceive stress negatively, that could actually kill you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, side note.
No, it's good because we do talk again in the program about good stress and bad stress and the differences that you might want to look for, because of course stress exists for a reason in an evolutionary way and it's important, but there are different types of stress. So your point is well taken, and helping our students learn the differences is something that we do spend a good amount of time on. So thank you. Mm-hmm. What's an important lesson that you have learned about relationships?
Oh, they're important. And I wouldn't be where I am today without the relationships I have and the ones I've fostered and the ones I'm privileged to kind of have in my life. I think of my family, my support system, my village. I think of people like you, like just my colleagues, my friends, like relationships are incredibly important. And when people say, oh, like networking, and they talk about networking, I think of relationships. When I think networking, I'm like, how can I foster a meaningful relationship with this person? And it's very organic. And that's, as soon as I just adopted that perspective and approached it that way, instead of just kind of, I don't know, it seems a bit disingenuous, I guess, just kind of thinking, oh, this is networking, so you are a means to an end. It's like, no, actually, like maybe get to know this person and get to appreciate them as a human and everything that they have to offer and like everything that they've done. And maybe they can just inspire you. And if that's it, that's friggin' great. So that's kind of how I think of relationships.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And what you just described, what we call in the program is authentic networking. And we explain it in a very similar way about it seems like an icky word to a lot of people, and a lot of young people.
It just kind of has a negative connotation. Yeah.
Yeah. And
at least for me personally.
I think it's very common, and people think about going to a cocktail party and handing out all your business cards and, making small talk. And so I appreciate that you're saying that. And one of the things that I like about you and about our relationship, which is true for many of the mentors, is that we don't talk often, but when we do, it's easy to just start talking about anything. And to me, that's because we have a lot of trust, and we have a real relationship versus a relationship that was built on each of us wanting something necessarily. So yeah, thank you. But I think it's an important point for people to understand, especially young people, that a great relationship doesn't necessarily mean that you talk to someone every day. There's a lot of different types.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I think of the best definition of diplomacy I ever heard was actually from one of the First Nations representatives from Cornwall. And this was during a law school class, and we went and did a road trip. And he said, true diplomacy is truly having another person's best interests at the forefront of your mind. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
And special.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. The next question is, if you have an important lesson that you've learned about work.
I would say, and you touched on this earlier, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I know that, it's funny because you said people are saying, focus on one thing and just go, do it all, which is important. If you're going to do one thing, because something's got to give, right? So if you're going to focus on something, focus and put all your time and attention into that. But I also would suggest try not to put all your eggs in one basket. And I remember having a conversation with a really good girlfriend from law school. And she was, having a bit of a freak out because the law firm that she worked at, and she put all of her blood, sweat, and tears in about 80 hours a week. As an articling student, she got less positive raving feedback from one of the lawyers that she was working for. And she was absolutely freaking out. And we had that discussion. She said, Afton, how do you, because I was telling her, I got negative feedback like today, and it was really bad. And like, it is what it is. She said, well, how do you, kind of have that attitude? And I was thinking about it, and I put my mind to it. And I think it's because I didn't have all my eggs in one basket. My articling position, my legal job wasn't my only thing on the go. I have my military job. I have the sports I play. I have lots of other kind of things that bring me joy and bring me fulfillment. So if one thing goes bad in one of those things, I'm like, it's not the end of the world, because that isn't my whole entire world. So I found that to be really important. And again, priorities. For me, I work to live. So I don't live to work. So my jobs are ultimately they're there, and I do them, and I actually do get a lot of fulfillment out of them. There's lots of mental stimulation, which is important. But they're there because I need to support my family. And the intent is for me to not work at some point and retire and enjoy and just be a mom and a grandma maybe, and, a wife, and do that. That's my ultimate goal. So again, prioritize, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and that can help you just kind of navigate this crazy life that is work.
I'm intrigued, and I appreciate that coming from a person, although our audience won't know you as well as I do. Hearing you say I work to live is interesting, because if I were to guess, you wouldn't be the first person that I would think of, because of how hard you work, and I see how passionate you are and excited about the work that you do in all different ways. So I think that's really a great example of how nuanced of a conversation it is. And part of the purpose of these conversations is for us to introduce a degree of complexity, or, to help young people understand that, a one sentence catch-all is never what we think it is. So I like that you said that. And I think it's great that we have this example of someone who works really hard, cares about what they do, gets fulfillment out of it, but also is not solely dedicated to that one thing. So that's great. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Change of direction here. And the next question, as you know, the students in Discovery Year have an opportunity to travel, an intentional travel period during their gap year.
Which is awesome.
And
it's my favorite part of your program.
And we should mention, we did not mention this, but I believe you did 3 gap years. We didn't get into that yet, but was it 3?
That's okay.
2?
I did 2 gap years after high school, and 2 more gap years after my bachelor's degree.
4 gap years. Yeah. And I love that.
Everyone told me I wasn't going to go to school, and I was like, I'll prove you wrong.
Yes, we should have this in the book somewhere, because there are a lot of people that think you'll never go back, and here you are working on your 4th degree later. So, but I think it's great to have, of course, many examples of successful, happy people who have done gap years. But where is the favorite place that you've ever traveled, and why?
Oh man. Well, I mean, I have to say Paris. Paris is my favorite city because I'm such a big foodie, and I lived a lot in Paris. I lived there. I visited there twice before I actually lived there for about 4 months. I did, as you know, my one semester of co-op there. I was taking 2 classes at Paris 2, which is like Panthéon-Assas, which is a university there. I was playing rugby. It was an amazing like semester of life. I was living right downtown in a beautiful apartment and working at a really amazing law firm. So I have a lot of great experiences there and great memories there, and the people are wonderful. I even did CrossFit there. Like I was totally in the community, and they have everything there. But most importantly, the crepes and the food and the bread and the cheese and the meat, the meat stick. It's my favorite. It's like I can't say enough good things about Paris. Whenever I hear people going to travel to Paris, I was like, how much time you got, buddy? Like, let me give you some notes. Like, yeah, Paris has to be my favorite. My second favorite has to be Burkina Faso in West Africa. That was also like that was a very trying time in my life. And I was there on a not co-op, sorry, an internship through my bachelor's degree. And it was very, very enriching and humbling. And there I learned how to appreciate, not how to, but just to appreciate all the things that we have here in Canada. And yeah, I definitely got excellent perspective after spending 4 months in the Horn of Africa.
Yeah, amazing. That is something that we commonly hear from our students. Oh, pretty much everybody comes back and says, I wouldn't have understood how much more I could appreciate what we have here, having been somewhere else. And oftentimes it's other, developed nations that people are going. So regardless of where our students go, they tend to appreciate what's here when they come back. So
I love my country so much, and I just loved it even more after that experience.
Yeah. Okay, the bonus question I have for you. So I'd like to return to this idea of the gap year briefly. And can you tell us a little bit about, for you, coming out of high school? You said you did 2 years after high school, 2 years again after your degree. How were you feeling when you left high school? How did you make that decision? And what did you gain from those experiences that you've applied down the road?
Oof. I would say those gap years were the most formative years of my life. Much like I say, my articling for law was the most formative legal experience I had, even compared to law school. The same thing from a work professional perspective, taking those gap years. So how did I feel graduating high school? I knew I had no idea what I wanted to do in university. So I decided to not spend my parents' or money or RESP or anything like that, and just keep it in the savings and save money. And the idea was for me to save enough money to pay for all 4 years of my bachelor's degree, because I wanted to just do that on my own and almost prove to my parents also that I was able to do that. I was working 4 jobs at the same time. I moved out, first experience ever living outside of my parents' home. And that was really that was also very formative, just learning to kind of, oh, I have to go do groceries because there's no food in the fridge. Okay. Oh, I have to do laundry. Where's the laundry? Not in the apartment. Got it. Just little things like that. So it was really a great learning experience. And professionally, my first break, we'll call it. I was working at one of my 4 jobs in a mall, just at a retail thing. And I sold I upsold someone on a product. And they came back asking if I would be interested in selling cars. At the time, I was 17 years old. So I said, absolutely. And they thought I was in my early 20s. So I went and met the dealer principal of the car dealership a couple of days later and told him my age. He said, well, you can't sell cars because we can't insure you until you're 18. But what we can do is put you in as the receptionist for a couple of months. So I did that. I got my foot in the door, and eventually I got promoted to car sales, and I sold cars for the next 4 years. And they kept me on while I was doing my bachelor's degree. So the performance was there, and I absolutely love the people at that car dealership. It's Bel Air Lexus Toyota. they kind of gave me my first break. And that was incredibly formative from a professional experience, learning how to negotiate, learning how to navigate the professional environment where everyone is older than you, learning what styles you do like, what styles you don't like from a management and colleague perspective, and just learning how the real world works, making real money for the first time, and then learning how to save it so that you can achieve your goals, which is paying for university.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that because a big part of what we do at Discovery Again is related to transferable skills and self-awareness and learning how to be an excellent employee, an excellent business owner, wherever you go, whatever you choose to do. So it's great to hear stories of how people have activated those lessons from when they were younger. So speaking of work, I'd love to know, I know we've only touched briefly, which is kind of part of the point on your actual job, but if you can, just in a couple of minutes, describe a little bit about what it means to you to be a lawyer. And what does that involve? If you have a young person who's considering becoming a lawyer, what kind of things should they be considering? Why did you choose to do law? And maybe even what do you like or less about that job?
Yeah. Well, I would say what I love about it is that I learn something new every day. Every day is humbling, and there's always something to learn, not only because the law evolves and changes every day, but also because it's so the depth of the law, and no matter how you shake it, no matter what branch of the law that you work in or study in, it is so wide that you will never not have new things to learn, or you know what I mean? You'll never get to a point where you know it all. And if someone does say that they know it all, don't hire them as your lawyer. So that's one thing that I really love about it. What I don't love as much, I would say, is some of the, and I can't say this is what I'm experiencing now, but in the past I've experienced it where more in the private practice sector, the culture there is a little, it's kind of something I can't really truly say hand over heart that I can get on board with. It's kind of, it celebrates working overtime, and it celebrates putting in, an exorbitant amount of hours and really giving everything you have to that one job. And I know that to a certain extent, it's important to be able to do that, but there is a finite amount of time where a human will be able to do that before they burn out. So I'm not a huge fan of that culture. I've seen how it can absolutely destroy people's lives and their mental health. And that is something that I can't really get on board with. A lot of law firms, and especially the one I was fortunate enough to work at a law firm that really has been working quite hard to combat that kind of workplace culture and mentality. But there is still, no matter where you go, a bit of the, we'll call it the old guard, where kind of that is still the norm or what's expected. So that's the thing that I don't like as much. Because you have to know your value, you have to know what you bring to the table, have to be kind of stand by your performance and your productivity and your output. So I found myself advocating quite a bit and saying, hi, you just asked me to get this done and it's due tomorrow. Well, this other person who's the same level as you asked me to do the same thing or something else that's due tomorrow. I'm one person and I have to eat and take some time for myself this evening. So how about you two talk and let me know when whatever, what's due at what time, and they can't both be due tomorrow. You decide. So I found myself saying that, and it takes a lot of guts to say it, but you need to be confident in what you bring to the table as a human, as an employee, as a colleague,
Yeah, we could talk a lot more about that, I'm sure, but maybe at the future conversation with our students, because it does take a lot of confidence. And I think I suspect, although I'm not a woman, I suspect that generally it's even more difficult for many women in the workplace. That's what I've read about and I've heard anyways from a lot of women. So that seems to be pretty understandable. So maybe at a future conversation, we can explore a little bit about how you came to be able to do that, because I think it's a really important skill.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd love to wrap up with our last question here. And this, we call these good life conversations because over the years we've realized that work and careers are, a necessary thing in our day and age. And at the same time, we felt it was important for students to kind of look in a broader sense at what it means to be a human and how to have a fulfilling, satisfying, meaningful life, a good life. And in the world in which we live today, many young people look out, whether it be on their screens in social media, or they hear stories, or they hear different things around them, and there's tend to be a lot of pressure to have it all figured out and to be very successful. So in the current context of that young people are growing up in, what words of wisdom would you offer them in the pursuit of the good life as they come into adulthood and strive to have a good, meaningful, satisfying life?
First of all, I don't envy kids today because I enjoyed not, in hindsight, I think it was excellent not having access to social media and all of the information and misinformation and disinformation that is now available to everyone. So I don't envy kids these days, and I feel for them. What I can say is take the leap, take chances. Don't be afraid to take chances. And how can you become less afraid to take chances? Take chances. Just start. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I would say. Because, I was approached by this random person who I had just upsold hand cream to. And the next thing I knew, I was the youngest salesperson at this car dealership in Ottawa, selling cars left and right, making a really great living and being able to pay for my apartment and my car and, getting my first car, like all of these things. So take chances. Had I not been, I am going to call this person. I was scared. I had no idea. I didn't own a suit. I didn't know what to do. So I went and met this dealer principal, this owner of this dealership, and I was scared, but I just did it because I had nothing to lose. So actually, that's probably a good piece of advice, is act like you have nothing to lose. Go for it, take chances, and don't be afraid to go for what you really want in life. And also don't be afraid to stand by your priorities. And if your priorities are totally different from the person next to you, that's okay. Like it's all right to be different. Just kind of keep those in mind and know what your why is and why you're putting in all this hard work. And that will help you get through the hard times as well.
Amazing. Yes. And the idea of taking chances and pushing your comfort zone is central to what we do. So I like how you say it. Just do it. You got to do it the first time and it'll be easier the next time. So thank you, Afton.
You're very welcome, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always great. And I know our students will look forward to chatting with you, and I will, of course, again. And I'm taking away the idea of taking the leap, diversifying your life and doing multiple things that interest you, and following those things, and keeping up good relationships for the sake of the relationships, and bearing the fruit that comes, whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, Afton. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Jay.